Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Ellison Barber, in for Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, damage control from the White House to Wall Street and beyond after the historic failure of two major U.S. banks. Now, President Biden trying to prevent more panic, telling customers their deposits are safe and promising swift action.
There are important questions of how these banks got into the circumstance in the first place. We must get the full accounting of what happened and why those responsible can be held accountable.
We have team coverage this morning with more on the fallout, the fears, and what it means for your money. Also this morning, a wintry mess taking shape on both coasts. In California, tens of millions of people waking up to a new round of flood alerts, some in areas already underwater after an historic storm. And back east, a powerful late-season storm is battering several states with heavy snow, rain, and wind. We're tracking the conditions and what to expect in your neighborhood. Off and running. This morning, the 2024 presidential race heating up as former President Donald Trump hits the campaign trail and takes aim at potential rival Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. This as Trump's legal troubles loom over his campaign. We'll tell you about the testimony from Trump's former attorney in front of a grand jury. And all the single ladies, put your hands up. New numbers shining a light on a growing trend. More women than ever are foregoing marriage, and it's having a major impact on the economy. We'll talk to the author of a new report about how single women are shaking up the financial world. All the single ladies, I love it. I got to say that so early.
You have that song in your head this morning.
Great song, great artist, interesting story. I'm excited.
Exactly.
Good to be with you.
Good to have you with us.
All right, this morning, the country is processing the historic bank failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank while trying to understand how widespread the ripple effects from those closures could be.
Yeah, yesterday, President Biden announced a federal intervention program to stop the financial hemorrhaging caused by the bank's collapse. And he highlighted steps that he says his administration is taking to prevent further fallout. He also reassured Americans that their money is safe and that they wouldn't be stuck footing the bill to rescue depositors of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe. Your deposits are safe. Let me also assure you, we will not stop at this. We'll do whatever is needed. No losses will be, and this is an important point, no losses will be borne by the taxpayers.
Still, that news did little to put investors at ease on Wall Street. Bank stocks suffered heavy losses yesterday, ending the trading day in the red. And this morning, there's more fallout for SVB. The bank's parent company, along with two top executives, are being sued by shareholders in a class action lawsuit for fraud. We're going to hear from a small business owner who was directly affected by the bank failure in just a moment. But first, let's get to NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee and Brian Sozzi, executive editor at Yahoo Finance. Brian, let's start with you. It was not exactly a good day on Wall Street for regional banks. We saw those losses yesterday. Did we expect those losses, or was that a little surprising?
Well, thank you for having me. And what you're seeing really is the loss of trust in what financial institutions essentially do. And that is why you saw shares of a First Republic really get hammered. But you also saw the likes of a Charles Schwab, one of the longtime just investment firms on Wall Street, their shares get hit as well. So lots of fear and contagion in the aftermath, what the financials might look like for a lot of these banks. That's why you saw the stocks sell off. Now, we are seeing a little bit of rally here in the pre-market today. But again, the fear on Wall Street very much remains out of there. And the next shoe to drop, guys, could be when these companies, these big banks, report earnings in just a few weeks. How were their finances hurt by the fallout of SVB?
So, Carol, let's bring you in here. We just heard that clip from the president announcing plans to protect depositors. He also called out a 2018 bank deregulation law that was passed under the Trump administration. He called on Congress to reverse it. What's the reaction, Ben, from lawmakers to that, and overall just to how the White House is handling this?
Well, it's mixed, as you would expect. There are falls along party lines in many ways. But what you've heard from Democrats, Joe, is that they're supportive of this. They think the president made the right decision. However, they really want to get to the bottom of what happened here with the collapse of these banks. You heard from Senator Elizabeth Warren writing this sort of "I told you so" op-ed in the New York Times, saying that that 2018 law you just mentioned needs to be reversed. You had some Republicans who are saying that this is the administration playing politics, that if it was a different type of company, if it wasn't a tech-focused company, that they wouldn't have come in and rescued this bank. And so they're calling this a bailout, which is something the White House rejects and does not want the president's actions to be labeled as. And then you've heard from senators like Mitt Romney, who said that the president made the right decision. So the president and his team have been briefing lawmakers. The president's calling for Congress to take action, whether it's that 2018 law reversing that or passing new other regulations that tighten up rules on how these banks operate. That's going to be a fight going forward. And look, it's a fight, politically speaking, that the president probably wants to have as he heads into potentially a re-election campaign.
Brian, you mentioned fear. There is a concern that other banks could be vulnerable. Is that a legitimate fear? I mean, what is next for the banking industry?
Well, the banking industry, like I just mentioned, is going through will likely go through a week or two of really heightened volatility. If you are a bank, what does this fallout mean for the treasury securities that you're trading? What does it mean for the stocks you are trading for clients? Now, I am surprised you did not see the market completely fall out of bed yesterday in the wake of this. And that is, I think, in large part the reflection of what the government did, essentially come in here and backstop depositors. But it doesn't mean all is fine on Wall Street. Volatility is back in these markets. And, oh, yeah, it comes at the same time where markets are still trying to figure out where in the world is inflation going and how might the Federal Reserve respond in next week when it has its next meeting. If they raise rates, even 25 basis points, you could see tremors come back to this market.
And Carol, I mean, President Biden said yesterday there will be consequences for banks that collapse. Quickly here, what are some of the steps the White House is considering?
Well, one of the things we've seen, and this is not related to the president, Joe, is the Federal Reserve saying it's going to review its oversight of SVB, for instance. Other things that the president is looking at, look, he suggested that there's going to be big consequences here. He said nobody is above the law. There's that lawsuit that you mentioned, but that's different than what the president is suggesting, which is that they will look at whether there were any criminal potential activities by executives at this bank, things that they could be looking at, like what were stock sales looking like in the month before the bank failed. So things like that. But the president's setting the bar pretty high here.
All right, Carol Lee and Brian Sozzi, thank you both for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
And joining us now is Vanessa Pham, a business owner who banked with SVB. She's the co-founder of the food business Som. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, Vanessa. I imagine you are still trying to process the last few days, but can you tell us what it's been like for you mentally and from a business perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's truly been an unprecedented experience, probably some of the hardest days in the business and, candidly in my life, just moving through this really challenging time with a lot of uncertainty for a business that, my sister and I started a few years ago. And I feel like as the daughters of Vietnamese refugees, that plays a huge part in our story and impacted our experience of the whole series of events. But yeah, we tried to make decisions, move as quickly as possible towards solutions as soon as the news started unfolding. But it felt like, circumstances were changing every hour. That being said, we ultimately decided to lean into our values as much as we can and communicate openly and transparently with everybody around the table for our company, including our community, our partners, and our investors.
President Biden was quick to speak out on this. We have already seen some government action, talk of different levels of action. Do you feel like the response to this has been adequate so far? And moving forward, what do you want to see the government do here?
Yeah, I'm still taking in all the inputs around, potential lawsuits. I think where I stand just as a small business owner and what I'm hoping to see, definitely the news that came out on Sunday night made all the difference for my company and many other companies, all the way from big tech to, smaller companies like mine. And so I'm very grateful for that personally. Going forward, I definitely am concerned about the state of the banking system and the stability there. And so we're doing everything in our power to manage that and would love to see the government support businesses like ours.
You also posted an open letter on social media. You asked in part for people to continue supporting small businesses like yours. You touched on this earlier about leaning into the values you and your sister have for this company. But what do you think is going to be next for you as an individual, as a business owner, and also for the totality of your business?
Yeah, I think we're going to be more prudent about how we store our funds. But beyond that, we have to be super focused on what's most important, which is growing our business, bringing more people into our universe. So we're selling our sauces in Whole Foods and Target and on our website. And our story has been, one that's resonated with consumers. So we're really focused on that. And it's become extremely clear to us that going forward, yes, we're relying on a broader system of structures, but there's also a lot of inequities there and a lot of instability there. So we're really leaning into community first and foremost to get through this really challenging time.
All right, Vanessa Pham, co-founder of OMSOM, thank you so much for your time, and we wish the best for you and your sister.
Thank you.
Now to our other big story, the weather. Two major storms are expected to batter both coasts this morning with no relief in sight for an already drenched California. In Monterey County, the situation is becoming dire.
Yeah, officials there are racing to repair a levee that broke over the weekend after an atmospheric river slammed the area. Now officials warn the breached levee could widen from 120 feet to 300 feet as a result of a second atmospheric river set to make landfall in Southern California later today. More than 30 million people are now under flood alerts because of the incoming storm system. And here in the Northeast, cities are preparing for snowfall as a slow-moving nor'easter closes in. According to the Weather Prediction Center, some regions will get up to 18 inches of snow and coastal flooding. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is asking residents to take the storm seriously.
People in upstate say, well, snow's coming, another snowstorm. I've lived my whole life with snowstorms, but this is one we're cautioning people that this could be deadly. It is very, very hard to plow the roads when there are people in front of you or cars that insisted on venturing out and end up in a ditch and have to be rescued.
We have meteorologist Angie Lastman standing by to give us an update on where the storm is headed next. But first, NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton is in Worcester, Massachusetts with the latest on the nor'easter. So, Antonia, what are you seeing so far on the ground this morning?
Good morning, Joe. Well, the cold rain that we had here yesterday has changed over to thick, heavy snow that's now coming down this morning. And this is the stuff that public works officials here in Worcester have been warning people about. This is the kind of sticky, heavy snow that stays on the ground. It accumulates. It makes it really difficult for them to get trucks out on the road to clear otherwise hazardous conditions. And so they're asking people, if you don't have to travel today, you don't have to hit the road, you don't have to commute into work, please stay home. If you absolutely have to get out there, they're reminding people that in these kinds of conditions, you need to make sure you have an emergency kit in your vehicle. You want to have batteries, you want to have a flashlight, you want to make sure all your devices are charged up so you can get in contact with people in case anything happens to you. They're expecting that these kinds of conditions are going to complicate not just the morning commute, but possibly well into the afternoon as well, because here in this part of the state in central Massachusetts, they're expecting about 10 to 20 inches of snow possibly. And the winter storm warning is going to be in effect until about 8 a.m. tomorrow. And so if you don't have to go out today, they're really warning people to be careful. They have about 325 trucks that are going to be just in this area alone trying to clear the road. But those officials are warning it's going to be tough for them. And it may be a while before these hazardous conditions are cleared and it's safe to get out there, Joe.
Officials have had a few days to prepare for this, though it's unclear exactly how much snow they're going to get. But how have officials been preparing for this big snowfall?
Well, they're warning people that power outages are very likely in conditions like this, because right now we're seeing the heavy snow, but we're also likely going to get some serious gusts of wind that could get up to 55 miles per hour. So that means, trees coming down. It means possible power outages. And so not only should people be ready for that at home, thankfully this is an area where a lot of people have things like backup generators, but it means you need to make sure that you have supplies and certainly run your last errands right now if you need to. The good news is National Grid has been preparing already for this for days. So they have about 1,000 crews, 3,000 workers on standby, ready to respond if it gets to that point, Joe.
And for the past couple days, we've heard governors throughout the Northeast issuing warnings. We just heard from Governor Hochul in New York. What are you hearing from the governor in Massachusetts, and are people heeding the warning?
Well, what we've heard from the governor here, Maura Healey, is a reminder that if you can work from home, you really should today. Again, it all comes down to these hazardous conditions and concerns about there being pileups. They don't want cars that don't need to be on the road to be on the road. There's a parking ban here in Worcester and in other parts of the state that are in effect simply because they want vehicles to clear as much space as possible. So she has asked for non-emergency employees to please stay home. You know, any members of her executive branch to stay home and telework today, and to kind of set an example for others. You know, some of the residents I've spoken to are planning to take that advice and are teleworking in cases. But of course, you know, there are people here who have to work. So they've also been told that if you have to, try to get on the road early before things potentially get, you know, more complicated, more sticky than they already are.
Antonia Hilton, where the snow is already falling in Massachusetts. Antonia, thank you.
Meteorologist Angie Glassman is here now with more on these powerful storms.
Hey there, Angie. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. We've got two of them. They're basically bookending the country. And of course, we have that atmospheric river that has been relentless all winter long. This is the next atmospheric river event that we're going to watch: flooding, damaging winds, power outages likely for parts of California. But we've got to start with the nor'easter. You just heard Antonio talking about it. We have the heavy rain. We have the heavy snow working into parts of the Northeast. And this is a long haul kind of event. This isn't just an early morning kind of thing that we'll deal with today. This will last into parts of tomorrow. The rain right now stretched from Boston down into portions of New York. We're going to see some of that transition over into snow, though. But if you look a little farther to the inland areas, there is heavy snow already falling. The winter alerts have been up, and they are up for 23 million people right now up and down the Northeast. Here's what we're expecting as far as impacts are concerned. We're going to talk about the snow, but let's talk about the strong winds first. We'll see gusts anywhere from 30 to 40 miles per hour. As you get a little closer to the coast, they'll be even higher. Atlantic City expecting to approach a gust of 50 miles per hour. Parts of Montauk as well, close to 50 miles per hour. That means coastal erosion, coastal flooding. Those will be some minor concerns for us, but it also means the possibility of power outages when you have that heavy, wet snow landing on tree branches. Down trees, down branches are all possible, which means down power lines as well. How about the snow? Really impressive rates that we'll get. Anywhere from 2 to 3 inches per hour is likely in a lot of places. The Catskills could total up to 3 feet. And you'll notice those higher elevations are where we're going to see the higher totals as we go through the day today and into tomorrow. Elsewhere, places like Scranton, 6 to 10 inches you can expect there. Albany, 8 to 16 inches. A little closer to the coast, Boston will eventually transition over from the rain to the snow and end up with anywhere from 3 to 7 inches. And again, this is really heavy snow, so it'll be troublesome when it comes to even shoveling or clearing those roadways. Something to watch for. As we move to the West Coast, there's that next atmospheric river event. This one is going to bring more rain, more flooding, and it's up and down the coast. It's not just focused to northern and central California. Los Angeles could pick up anywhere around 3 inches over the next day or so. They, of course, are going to be dealing with some flooding concerns, as well as up the coast into places like San Francisco. We see the high risk of flash flooding for numerous locations today. We have the swollen waterways. We have the really saturated grounds. It's not going to be very hard to get some of this additional flooding through the state of California. Some of those amounts come in anywhere from 6 to 8 inches in the LA Mountains coastal range. Same kind of range there with 6 to 8 inches in the Sierra foothills, anywhere from 6 to 8 as well. On top of that, the strong winds. This isn't just the Northeast dealing with the winds. This is also a system on the West Coast that's going to impact folks, 14 million people with these wind alerts. And you can see why. Anywhere from 30 to 40 mile per hour winds, up to 50 as we look towards Monterey. So this is, again, a situation where the down trees, down power lines will be something to watch for over the next day or so. Eventually, the system does move to the east, and we'll see some snow for parts of the Rockies. But we'll get an additional 4 to 6 feet of snow in parts of the Sierra.
And they've already got plenty there right now.
They sure do.
All right, thanks, Angie. Appreciate it. Former President Donald Trump made his first appearance in Iowa since announcing he was running for the White House again. Speaking before a packed crowd in Davenport yesterday, Trump discussed several issues while frequently unloading on Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in a series of attacks.
Yeah, this rally came just hours after Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, testified before a New York grand jury in an investigation into hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. Here to discuss all of this is NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray and NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Thank you both for joining us. Mark, let's start with you. Walk us through what we heard from Trump yesterday. How did the crowd react to those attacks on DeSantis?
Yeah, Ellison, last night we ended up hearing former President Donald Trump's probably harshest critiques and remarks aimed at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Donald Trump ended up hitting Ron DeSantis on DeSantis' past support for restructuring entitlement programs like Medicare and Social Security. And Donald Trump also took aim at Ron DeSantis' past opposition to subsidies for ethanol, which you know is a key industry in Iowa. Take a listen to his remarks.
Ron DeSantis strongly opposed ethanol. Do you know that? And we don't even know if he's running, but I might as well tell you. If he's not running, I'll say he was fine on ethanol. Don't worry about it. He strongly opposed ethanol and fought against it at every turn, and he's going to do that again.
Ellison, though, as far as your question, how the crowd received it, it was a raucous crowd in support of Donald Trump. But when he specifically mentioned Ron DeSantis and those attacks last night, it was kind of fell on some deaf ears. There was a little bit of silence, according to our reporters on the ground, who might not have been all that interested in Republican attacks this early in the race.
Danny, this rally comes amid ongoing legal troubles for Trump. His attorney said yesterday the former president will not appear before that New York grand jury. Does his no-show impact the investigation at all?
No, not likely. I don't think anyone expected him to appear before the grand jury. Typically, if you have any kind of exposure and you're called to testify before a grand jury, you're going to exercise your Fifth Amendment and decline to appear. You work that out with your attorney and the prosecutors, but in all likelihood, he won't appear. And the prosecutors must have known that. I'm sure it was not going to go down. So the investigation moves forward. I don't think this impacts the conclusions very much. It was something that was expected. And in all likelihood, Trump didn't want to go either, because it's not an opportunity to grandstand. It's the opposite. Grand jury proceedings are secret. So nobody's going to hear whatever it is he has to say except for the grand jury members and pretty much nobody else.
So, Mark, how is Trump handling the investigations on the trail? Has he mentioned it? Is it having any sort of impact among his supporters?
Yeah, he definitely mentioned it in his rally in Iowa last night. He criticized the grand juries. He criticized the Biden Justice Department, as well as the prosecutors who are looking into these various matters. And Ellison, you know, it is what ends up happening legally to Donald Trump might actually be the most important unanswered question in this very, very early 2024 Republican race. It's possible that an indicted Donald Trump could end up reshaping things, could end up having Republicans maybe decide not to support him, or it could actually end up rallying Republicans to his cause. And so what ends up happening on the legal front is going to be a really, really important development.
All right, we'll keep an eye on it.
Yep, Mark, Danny, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell is out of the hospital following a fall at a dinner last week. A statement confirmed from his office confirmed that the 81-year-old suffered a concussion as well as a minor rib fracture during the fall. Mitch McConnell's office additionally stating that he will undergo physical therapy at an inpatient rehab facility before returning home. McConnell previously fell in 2019, fracturing his shoulder at that time.
Coming up on Morning News Now, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak getting candid about growing tensions with China.
Is China a threat?
Well, China represents the biggest state threat to our economic interests, for sure.
Up next, the NBC News exclusive as the Prime Minister sits down with our Lester Holt. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. On Monday, President Biden, along with the leaders of Australia and the United Kingdom, announced a new phase of a defense agreement. It's meant to counter China's expanding influence in the Asia-Pacific region.
And ahead of that meeting, NBC's nightly news anchor, Lester Holt, sat down with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for his first U.S. TV interview to talk about China as his own country bounces back from political turmoil.
Britain is back, and, you know, part of the job that I've got as Prime Minister is to give people that confidence in our country.
Rishi Sunak emerged last fall from a revolving door of British prime ministers. Now returning to a state he called home for several years, we fittingly met aboard a retired warship, now the USS Midway Museum, just as Prime Minister Sunak leads the UK into an even closer military alliance with the US and Australia, as concerns grow over China.
Is China a threat?
China represents the biggest state threat to our economic interests, for sure, and is a systemic challenge for the world order. Now, that's why it's important that we take steps to protect ourselves against that.
Alarms raised recently over that Chinese spy balloon.
What kind of signal did the balloon that overflew the U.S. send?
The balloon incident here was an example of that behavior that I talked about that is concerning, whether it's the balloon incident, whether it's how China's behaving in the South China Seas. Those are all examples of a regime that is acting in a way that is not aligned with the values that we share between the US, the UK, Australia and other allies.
And China is also under fire for blocking independent inquiries into the origins of COVID. The FBI and Energy Department now assessing COVID came from a lab leak in China, though there's no US government consensus.
What's your government's position on the COVID origins?
There's clearly questions that need to be answered. I'd certainly say that, and we haven't ruled anything out at this stage. I think what we want to see and fully support is a proper scientific inquiry as to the origins, and we would urge everyone, including China, cooperate with that investigation.
You think it's still an open question?
Yes, I think there certainly are questions that need answering. We wouldn't rule anything out at this stage.
And then there's China's role in Russia's war in Ukraine. China already gives crucial economic aid to Russia. Would it go further and provide weapons?
If that were to happen, what should the response be?
That would be a very worrying and dangerous development.
Would you support sanctions against China?
I think as with sanctions, it's always something that is best done coordinated with allies, because for sanctions to be effective, we have to do them together.
You have suggested that everything is on the table when it comes to defending Ukraine. UK stepped forward with tanks, longer-range missiles. Do you draw the line at fighter jets, or is that still in the cards as far as you're concerned?
I think it's important right now that we accelerate and intensify our support to Ukraine. And the reason I say that is because they have an opportunity to have a decisive advantage on the battlefield if they're given the right support. And that's why we've led an effort to provide extra capabilities, heavy tanks, longer range fires, more air defense. And what we want to do is to ensure that Ukraine can win.
Your counterparts in Germany and France have suggested this is going to end up in a negotiation when all is said and done. Do you think that's where and how this ends?
Well, I think, look, ultimately, those decisions are for Ukraine to make. Our job is to put them in the best possible position to make those decisions. We want to see Ukraine victorious.
Prime Minister Sunak making history as Britain's first prime minister of color. And he came into office at another moment of historic change, with the UK getting its first new monarch in over 70 years.
What's your relationship like with King Charles?
I mean, I was his first appointed prime minister, actually. It's a very special moment in my life, and now I have the privilege of sitting down with him every week.
Good discussions?
Great discussions.
He's trying to modernize the monarchy. You're trying to bring more tech into the UK's economy. Are you kindred spirits on some level?
I think, look, actually, King Charles is someone who issues that politicians and governments are grappling with have been issues that he's been talking about for a long time, particularly climate change, where he's been very passionate about that topic. He's someone who, absolutely is someone who wants to represent everybody. As Prime Minister, it's a great privilege to champion all our British institutions, our culture, our history, our values around the world, but particularly the monarchy.
Our thanks to Lester Holt for bringing us that part of an exclusive interview with Britain's Prime Minister.
International headlines now, starting with a show of force from North Korea, just one day after the U.S. and South Korea started joint military drills.
NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv with that and a whole lot more. Good morning, Raf.
Alice and Joe, good morning. That's right. Tensions heating up once again on the Korean Peninsula, with the U.S. and South Korea conducting their largest military drill in years. North Korea this morning firing 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the sea off its east coast. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command said the launches didn't pose a threat to either U.S. forces or territory, but said the North's unlawful weapons program had a destabilizing effect on the region. In southern Africa, more than 100 people have now been confirmed killed by Tropical Storm Freddy. Both Mozambique and Malawi were hit twice by the cyclone, which is one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the southern hemisphere. The full extent of the damage is not yet known, as power supply and phone lines were destroyed by the storm. And finally, long live the king in stamp form. The first British stamps bearing the head of King Charles are now being released by the Royal Mail. They show the new monarch's silhouette alongside popular garden flowers. Charles is known to be a passionate gardener and environmentalist, and these new stamps are meant to reflect that. So, guys, starting next month, any postcards you're getting from London, they're going to have King Charles's stamp on them.
Very cool. Now I just need to find people in London to send me mail. All right. Thank you, Raph. Appreciate it.
All right, coming up, workplace woes. A new report suggests climbing the corporate ladder is taking a mental toll on many women. What researchers are saying, plus what can be done to fix it.
And are they lucky, or is it something more? We're going to explore how some people have somehow been able to avoid getting COVID now 3 years into the pandemic. This is Morning News Now. We're back with our weekly mental health check-in. We're looking at why the so-called girl boss era could come with a price. It's because more women in leadership positions say they're feeling lonelier than ever.
Yeah, plus if you like to treat yourself on a bad day, you might be considered an emotional spender. We have tips on how to manage.
Let's bring in Dr. Soumya Dave for more. She is a psychiatrist and author of What a Happy Family. Dr. Dave, always good to have you with us. So let's start with that new report that found 55% of senior-level women have felt lonely at their jobs at least once in the last month. Do we know why it is that women are feeling unsupported? What's the impact of this, and what can we do to fix it?
There are so many reasons why this is happening. We know that as women are progressing in their careers, they're feeling more lonely, whereas men are feeling less lonely. And by the way, these numbers also are going up for women of color. Now, there are so many factors playing into it. Women tend to do more unpaid and under-recognized labor at work and at home. It's harder for them to find, create, and maintain community. And they're feeling like they have a lot of unrealistic expectations and a lack of support. And now I think it's so important for us to think about all these factors because we're seeing that a lot of them are structural things that have been put in place for a long time. So it's going to take a lot of structural changes for this to shift as well.
So let's talk about the spending habits among millennials and Gen Z. According to Credit Karma, 58% of Gen Z and 52% of millennials say they are more likely to make purchases in response to how they're feeling at the time. I didn't think I was guilty of this, but then I started thinking about all the Amazon boxes I have, and it's possible. What does that sort of spending tell you about a person's emotional well-being? And is there anything we can do to stop emotionally spending if we are realizing right now that we fall into that category?
So what's so interesting about emotional spending is that it can be a response to coping with a variety of emotions. So that can mean happiness, it can mean boredom, it can mean anxiety, really the entire spectrum of emotions. And now, since we're seeing that so many people are feeling like they're going through this, there are a lot of things we can do, okay? I always go back to the power of pause. If there's something that you see and you like it, can it hang out in your shopping cart for at least one day, maybe 2 days, maybe longer, and then you can see if you really still want it after that period of time. The second step I recommend is to have a substitute activity. Now, if we are spending to help with our emotions, that means we might be able to do other activities to help with our emotions as well. So if that urge to shop comes up, is it possible to take a walk, call a supportive friend, get some sunlight, and see if that really helps? And then the last step is to see if there's some support that you can get in that, whether that's reaching out to someone to help with budget planning, really seeing if there are friends where you can keep each other accountable, or even talking to a therapist to see if there are emotional regulation patterns going on that can get some more support.
Some good advice there. The power of pause. I like that. Finally, let's talk about the pause we had 3 years ago. I mean, it's been 3 years since the COVID pandemic was first declared a global health emergency. And it does seem like now people are forgetting what it was like to live in lockdown. Maybe that's a good thing. But why is that? And is there a risk when we forget an event like this? I mean, how does that impact just the way we live our lives?
We have to remember, right, that people have been through so much since the beginning of the pandemic, whether we're talking about grief, loss, uncertainty around new variants, shifting guidelines, and the brain can only retain so much, right, over time. We think of our memories as sticking there forever, but they really actually shift and they're quite dynamic over time. On top of that, a lot of people found that their days blended together, so it can be hard for the brain to really distinguish from one day to the next. Now, we also know that the brain doesn't like holding on to stress. So as we all hopefully fill our brains with more positive and more hopeful memories, it's very likely that the ones associated with negativity and stress will change. I think we're going to continue to learn more and more about this as time goes on.
Right. Dr. Soumya Dave, as always, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
As we mentioned earlier, we're now 3 years into the COVID pandemic, and despite hundreds of millions of diagnoses, some people have actually beaten the odds and never tested positive.
So is it luck, or were they born with some form of super immunity?
For more, we're joined by NBC News medical reporter Erica Edwards. Erica, thank you so much for being here. You wrote an article for NBCNews.com. According to CDC, nearly 60% of people in the U.S. have had COVID. Some people have had it multiple times. So what is the secret here? Is it possible to actually avoid it entirely? Is it habits? Is it immunity? What are we looking at?
Are we feeling lucky here?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like 99% of the people I know have had COVID,
yes.
so I don't know.
Yeah, maybe not luck then. So I've been flooded with emails from people who say, listen, I've been exposed so many times to COVID, I've never tested positive. They want to know what the secret is. So, there are several possible reasons. Number one, maybe there is some kind of super immunity hidden somewhere in our DNA. Maybe they were vaccinated. They took other measures to avoid getting infected. Or maybe they were infected, but they never knew it. They never felt sick. They had an asymptomatic infection. Maybe it was all three. That's what scientists are really trying to figure out right now.
So I guess the question is it possible to be immune from COVID without having gotten it before, without having to get the shots? Are some people just immune to it?
It's not unheard of. Actually, there are some people, rarely, who have genes that protect them from HIV, that protect them from that nasty stomach bug norovirus. So again, it's not unheard of, and that's really why researchers are enthusiastic about trying to find some kind of genetic variant that would protect people from COVID.
So if they were to find a genetic variant like that, is that something that could be replicated and then reproduced for others? What would that mean for people who weren't born with it?
Right, that's the ultimate prize there, right? I mean, now reality check, that's probably years away. However, what they want to do with this information is to make medications or treatments to use this to stop COVID for good. Whatever scientists can learn with COVID is only going to be helpful when the next virus comes along.
But for now, those people are just enjoying their lives without ever having COVID. I know a few. I can think of a handful of people I know of who've never had it, and they test regularly, and if they don't feel well, they check it out, and nope, it's never COVID.
And there are varying levels of immunity, right? Consistently,
and
just regardless.
Exactly. You're exactly right. I mean, some people get, mild symptoms. Some people, end up in the hospital. And that's why it's really important to get this under control.
Something that we are still, no matter how many years pass, constantly learning things about.
Exactly.
So,
all right.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Coming up, it is being called the rise of the she-economy.
A new study shows more women are staying single, and that's making a big mark on the financial world. We'll have more on the trend and its far-reaching impacts here on Morning News Now.
It has been a growing trend in America for decades, women forgoing marriage and remaining single.
Yeah, and according to a new report from Wells Fargo, this growing group is actually having a profound impact on the economy and the workplace. Sarah House, the senior economist at Wells Fargo and lead author of that report, joins us now to break it all down. Sarah, it is so good to see you. Talk to us about this report. What are some of the major findings, and what role are single women playing in the economy?
Right. So what we've seen is single women grow faster than any other marital or gender group over the past decade. So the ranks of single women are up 12.5% over the past decade, and that's been entirely driven by the rise of women who are never married. So we've seen the number of never married women in the U.S. grew 20% over the past 10 years alone. And that's a really important mark on the labor force because never married women have higher labor force attachment. So they're more likely to be in the workforce. And that's really important at a time when the jobs market is still very tight. And employers are having, in some ways, some of the hardest time they've ever had in decades finding workers. So never married women are helping fill that void.
So, Sarah, I mean, we know that women in America have consistently earned less than men. What is the current wage gap? And then could the fact that single women are such a force, a growing force in the economy, could it change that?
Yeah, so there's different ways to measure the wage gap. So one of the ways we looked at was just looking at the median weekly earnings of full-time working men and women, and we compared it across marital status. And what we found is the wage gap is narrowest among never married individuals. So that reflects that they tend to be younger, earlier on in their career, where they've been less likely to take time out of the workforce, which can be a pay penalty later on. But what we found is even within that group is you're still seeing a wage gap of about 92%, or the women earn about 92% of men. So it's a wage gap of about 8%. And that really hasn't changed that much over the past 15 years. So relative to before the financial crisis, it's whittled around, but we really haven't seen any meaningful inroads in terms of that wage gap, despite the fact that women's participation is growing faster, that women are accounting for a growing share of the workforce in the economy, and increasingly their work experience mirrors that of men.
Sarah, what's driving this change? Is this a financial decision that some people are making to say, hey, marriage is just not for me? Is this just a bigger shift in society and the way we approach relationships? What role or what is moving people to take this route?
Yeah, so I think in many ways it's a social decision where it's becoming more socially acceptable to not be married. There's also, I think, the economic considerations, though, where you see women increasingly in the workforce, and so even if they don't get paid as much as men, it is acceptable for them to be working, and they can earn still a decent living. And so I think it's a little bit of both social and economic.
Interesting stuff. Sarah House, thank you so much.
More financial news now. Other banks are being hit with the repercussions of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us now with more. Good morning.
Ellis and Joe, good morning. Yeah, so large banks such as JPMorgan Chase and Citigroup are being flooded with requests from customers trying to transfer funds from smaller lenders. Industry executives say the failure of Silicon Valley Bank is resulting in the biggest movement of deposits in more than a decade. The Financial Times reports large banks are trying to accommodate customers wanting to move their cash quickly, taking extra steps to speed up the normal sign-up or onboarding process. And that could help business customers access funds to ensure they can pay their staff at the end of the week. Volkswagen plans to invest nearly $200 billion over the next few years to expand in North America and China. More than 2/3 of that investment will go toward electric vehicles and digitization. VW says every fifth vehicle sold worldwide is expected to have an all-electric drive by 2025. Electric vehicles achieved a 10% market share industry-wide for the first time last year. Call it a case of mistaken identity. A man in Vancouver was able to unlock and drive someone else's Tesla Model 3 by only using the Tesla app on his phone. He says he thought he was getting into his own car because it was the same color. He didn't realize his mistake until noticing things in the car didn't look quite right, and then he got a text message from the actual owner who was able to unlock and get into his Tesla. They eventually switched cars. The man says he tried to contact Tesla with video evidence, but hasn't heard back. How about that?
Yeah, he's like, this car is very clean. What happened? My goodness. All right. Silvana, thank you so much.
You got it. And coming up, they're planting seeds in more ways than one.
When we come back here on Morning News Now, how a couple of Black-owned businesses are working to change the way we look at food. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Actress Tessa Thompson has done it all, from dramas like Creed to superhero blockbusters like the Marvel movies. But there's one thing the star says she has not done that may surprise her fans. She says she has never eaten a hamburger in her life. Now, the star made this stunning admission to a Vanity Fair reporter at the magazine's Oscar party Sunday night. And no, she's not a vegetarian. She eats other meat. She just has never had a burger. She added that she also tried eggs for the first time recently and was not impressed. What does she eat? Tessa does have a love for potatoes, she says, but I'm guessing then those weren't French fries if she's never had a burger, right? I mean, how do you have French fries without having a burger?
Okay, not having the burger is deeply regrettable. I saw her try eggs for the first time on Jimmy Fallon, and I kind of related to it because I have not had a baked potato in like 15 years, which is very weird. But I'm like, maybe it's a texture thing. The burger, I can't understand.
I just want to know what she eats.
That's a very fair question.
All right. Fish. She likes fish.
Fish.
Right. There you go.
That's great. All right, so the numbers of black farmers in this country has fallen dramatically in the past century, but two black-owned businesses in Philadelphia are teaming up to change the way we look at food and history from the farm to the table. Here's NBC News correspondent Maya Eaglin.
Walking through these 5 acres of this lush, green and leafy farm, Krista Barfield tests this season's crops for freshness and taste.
I can eat arugula all day. And just checking on, that's how you check on your plants too. Like, make sure they taste good. If they taste good, they're doing good.
Krista is the founder of Farmer John Philly, a black-owned, community-supported agriculture farm. Through what she calls her Earthborn brand, her team harvests and ships food orders throughout Philadelphian communities.
To understand from a health perspective that I want to grow food regeneratively and organically, and that can help heal people and heal the planet at the same time. I'm like, how do we train people to farm in this way? This is a tatsoi, which is related to bok choy. So it's sort of like a spinach bok choy hybrid.
These plants are about to make their way 11 miles to another black-owned business, Honeysuckle Provisions in West Philly. Here, skilled chefs and artists Omar Tate, a Philly native, and Sybil St. Aud Tate, a first-generation Haitian-American, prep for lunch. Farmer John and Honeysuckle Provisions partnership has been a long time in the making. Omar's route to his own store started with a dining pop-up, leading to a traveling dining series supporting black farmers, all under the umbrella of Honeysuckle Projects. After Omar and Sybil got together, they collaborated and Honeysuckle Provisions was born.
Part of the idea of nourishment isn't just about, filling a hole or filling a void or stopping the bleeding. Sometimes it's about joy, because although the store is black, what we find is that everyone can celebrate the space.
In the market portion of the cafe, you'll find shelves lined with crisp, dewy vegetables. Across from these are custom t-shirts, influential cookbooks by black authors, and even art. Thought-provoking displays, whether on paper or plate.
If we're continuing to tell the story that we tell through our work, through the store, through the items on the menu, through how we interact with our guests, through the ingredients we source, through the farmers that we work with.
Partnerships like these are going against a historical trend. According to the USDA, only about 1.4% of American farmers today are black, a drastic difference from 14% over a century ago. One study estimates that if black farmers received equitable pay and land ownership, the U.S. would have a jump in economic value up to $5 billion.
You don't see black farmers in the city, right? It's really important for that to happen. And then for us, as artists and as chefs in the hoods, in the place where we grew up, is really the way forward.
Krista first heard of Omar when a family member mentioned the Tate's name when picking up an order from Farmer John. She began researching and found Omar on a Netflix docuseries about the origins of African-American cuisine. Knowing they shared a vision, she reached out.
I immediately sent him an IG message and was like, I can't believe you thought of me to be growing food for your family. I'm completely honored, and that from there our relationship bloomed and we're literally like family now.
Turns out that community was a lot closer to home for Omar and Krista.
Krista and I might actually be cousins, and we didn't know that until we met in a town in North Carolina where both our ancestors are from. So we might actually be cousins. So that is beyond community at this point.
Our thanks to Maya for that story. And next month, Omar and Sybil are launching produce boxes that support Black farmers, while Krista is leasing land from a school to create a new organic farm.
Love that story. All right. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.